Okay. Wow. Firstly, I'd just like to say welcome everyone for this Meditation Australia pod, the power of language in meditation teaching. It's kind of humbling to see how many people have registered for this event. We had over 80 people. So I guess that says something about the potency of this particular topic, I guess, as well as the fact, at least in Melbourne, it's a cold and windy day and we're all in lockdown. So there you go. But firstly, I just wanted to welcome everybody. For those that don't know me, my name's Packman. I'm the president of Meditation Australia. And with me today is Lisa Forde, the vice president, or the freshly minted vice president of Meditation Australia. We've also got Paul Majeski with us, who's just stepped aside for Lisa to come in. So welcome, Paul, as well.
Thanks, Ash.
No problem, brother. Good to see you. So yeah, I guess today's topic, I'll come back and talk a little bit more about that in a little bit more detail, but I wanted to just begin by just spending a minute or two, just perhaps settling into a quiet, silent, still space, maybe acknowledging country and then coming back and beginning things. So I invite you all to close down your eyes. We're all very, very well versed in this practice. Just bring everything in. Just let all parts of you just catching up and arriving in the space together. Maybe planting the feet on the ground, heel and toe, as we acknowledge the soil, the rocks and stones, the ground underneath our feet. Acknowledge the original owners of that ground. For me in Naarm in Melbourne, south of the river, it's the Bunurong people of the great Kulin nation. But I invite you to recognize the original owners of the land upon which you sit right now. And recognize their everlasting connection to land, to country, waters, and culture. Pay our respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. And let's just stay in silence for a minute or so in our own way. Thank you, everyone. Just gently reopening the eyes. And so again, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. The power of language, the power of words. That's what we're here to discuss through a number of different lenses this afternoon. And as meditation teachers, I think it's such an important topic that we're discussing, particularly now at this moment in time, where words and language is really so vitally important in our culture, in the political environment, in terms of our sensitivities and inclusivities. So today, I guess we're going to explore how it influences our teaching, but also perhaps in a more broader context. And Lisa and I have been discussing how to kind of use the next couple of hours. And I think we've come up with a good plan for looking at it through various different lenses and then having the opportunity to kind of discuss it together. So the way it's going to work is Lisa's going to begin by discussing some of the, I guess, the guidelines and the practicalities around how to use language and how to use our words precisely in a teaching environment. And once we've done that, we'll break out into some smaller groups and kind of discuss those together before coming back into the larger group. Then I'm going to talk about it from a slightly different angle, perhaps a kind of a less linear way. And we'll break out into another discussion based on that before coming back together again for a kind of final get together and some final few words. So that's basically the way it's going to work. What I will ask is that you remain muted until we go into the breakout rooms, and then when we return, there'll be time for question times. I'll also say that this event's being recorded, so you'll have the opportunity to listen to it again, and for those that are registered but haven't joined, they'll also get the opportunity to listen to our conversation. So I think with that, Lisa, if you're ready, I think I'll just hand over to you and let's have a chat around some guidelines, some practicalities and a general discussion around language and words in the teaching space.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Asha, for that welcome. Okay, so I'm spotlighted now. Yeah. Okay. So in the 2017 National Health Survey, 1 in 5 or 4.8 million Australians reported suffering from a mental health condition. And since the pandemic, those needs have grown, with the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare reporting that 4.4 million Australians received mental health related prescriptions. Lifeline's seen an increase of 10 to 20% in the number of calls received, and Beyond Blue about 30%. So the landscape is changing. You know, mental health needs are increasing, and we might find more people with those sorts of needs in our group when we're teaching. And we also live in a culture that's really starting to wake up to the need for inclusivity and kindness in the way that we speak. And it's demanding change in us in the way we interact with each other. So what does this all mean for us as meditation teachers? I guess now more than ever, it can be helpful to be prepared and informed in how to use gentle, neutral, trauma-sensitive and supportive language, and to become really more aware of the power and the impact of our words, both when we're guiding facilitation and facilitating discussion, so that we're able to communicate sensitively with our students and accommodate a variety of needs, but also for everyone. You know, I mean, it's difficult to just switch on being able to speak in a certain way when you're teaching a meditation group. And Asha and I were discussing how it feels like something I kind of need to incorporate into my whole life and in the way I communicate in general, so that it flows into my teaching as well. So I guess when we're teaching, though, we're in a meditation group, things can be even more amplified. So when a student comes into our meditation space, they're making themselves vulnerable. You know, they're opening themselves up, perhaps in a way that people don't normally do. And we're guiding them into opening up their inner world. And that requires a certain amount of awareness, respect and care. As we're guiding people to slow down and become more aware, more sensitive of the subtle feelings going on inside them, becoming more curious and open, surrendering, we want to make sure that our words meet that task of creating and maintaining a space that really makes it possible for people to relax and let go comfortably. And I suppose that comes back to our participants feeling comfortable in our presence. And so the way we speak and the way we communicate will in part determine that. So when someone's deep in their meditation or their relaxation, when you think about it, you know, they're really vulnerable, they're really open. Every word counts. Every word that we say kind of resounds and echoes through that person's open consciousness. So there's a lot of opportunity there in a way, isn't there? And words spoken with a kind of open heart and with that love and gentleness, with that vulnerability and care, can be absolutely transformative. And when we communicate really honestly from the depth of our own insight and experience, that I believe that heart connection and that authenticity can be felt by other people. And that's the kind of communication that comes from having done that inner work, you know, that heart opening work, from attending retreats, from years of personal practice, and from kind of being on our journey with awareness. All of that experience, all of that energy is in the words and the actions that you share with others and the way you communicate with people. And I think when that inner work's been done, the rest kind of happens fairly organically. You know, that sensitivity and compassion for others that comes from your own suffering and from your own wisdom that comes from that suffering tends to flow fairly naturally. So Ash is going to delve more deeply into some of the larger themes in this discussion. But for now, I'd like to get straight into some of the strategies to help with creating more of a respectful, inclusive and gentle environment. And I suppose most of you will probably already be doing a lot of these things, but I'm going to start actually just by sharing my screen. So just bear with me while I do that. Okay. So we're going to start by just putting the power of words into the context and language into the context of what's not language, because there's a lot of communication that happens without words. And that sort of communication can be very powerful. I think it can help to take the pressure off the kinds of words we're using. It can be easy to kind of jump into a fearful place with, oh, I hope I'm not saying the wrong thing and all of that. So remembering that there's a lot we can use to frame our words, to hold our words, that can change the message and really soften how we're speaking. One of those things is body language, the way we talk, also our facial expression. So using a certain facial expression, you can communicate a lot of compassion and care. I think one of the top things when we're guiding meditation is tone of voice. You know, it's so powerful. It holds all our words, and our tone of voice can actually change the meaning of a word. So it can be very, very useful when we're guiding meditation to be really aware of that tone of voice. Even the way we set up the room, you know, there's a communication that happens in that when we take time and care and love to set up a meditation space and someone walks into that space, what's being communicated to them about what we're trying to create in that space. I've said facial expression, and then there's pauses and silences. So pauses and silences during the guidance of meditation, and also spaces of pause and silence in your facilitation style. And I think that can really communicate respect and compassion. You know, we're out in the culture, it's very noisy, it's very fast. When we come into that meditation group and into your classes, it's wonderful to provide a space of slowing down, a sanctuary where people can feel like, I can let go here. And silence and pause kind of creates that space around words that allows us to slow down, you know, to take time to think about what we're saying before we say it. And, you know, even if someone shares something in the group, something maybe in the after the meditation that's profound, just taking a bit of silent time after that can really honour the depth of what someone shared. It can show them that you're listening, that you care, that you're available to them in that space. So if we pause, we have more time to process what's been shared, and that also allows us to reconnect with our intentions. It allows us to be centered in a deeper place when we respond to other people. So I think that beautiful use of silence, if you can really cultivate that in your life in general, and then somehow bring that into your teaching, I think it's something so valuable and special to bring to people. It really creates space for people to be with themselves and slow down. So you can see that there's a lot happening before we even get into language. You know, there's a lot that we can do that can really frame our language in a way that communicates what we want to. And then we can come to language itself. So things like giving people choice and agency when you're guiding meditation practices. Using language that's invitational rather than prescriptive or directive. Using words such as maybe when you're ready or in your own time, or if this feels comfortable to you. Again, it's like you're creating a spaciousness around what you're instructing them to do. I think John Kabat-Zinn does this really well. So if this isn't something you already do, or if this is something you want to work on, I think listening to some of his guided meditations, he has a really nice way of gracefully inviting people into things. So if it's something, you know, that you're trying to get used to, it can be worth looking at that. And by doing that, we're kind of inviting people to adapt the meditation to suit them and to do what feels right for them, even if it might be different to what you're instructing them to do. And it may even help to communicate that before you even begin guiding the meditation, that, you know, it's okay for people to do what they need to do in the meditation. The next one's not telling people how to feel. So yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's a bit old. I think of it as being a little bit old school when we sort of say to people, okay, now you're relaxed, you know, you're peaceful. And I don't do that. I think I don't like to assume that someone's feeling that way. I feel like it can be a little bit invalidating. And if they're not there yet, it might feel like they've failed. And, you know, for most of us, if we're going to a meditation group, a lot of us might be really frazzled when we walk in. It might be the last thing we're feeling is peaceful. So we might just not be there yet. So it might be better to use words like notice how you feel, or become aware of any changes in how you feel, or just notice the state of your body right now. And you know, of course, we want to give them the best experience we can, but part of that might mean giving them a process to reach that feeling rather than telling them they're feeling peaceful. So you might say something like, invite into your experience a sense of peace, or remember a time you felt that peace, invite that into your experience, rather than assuming that the peace is already there. There's also the different modes of perception. You know, there's the auditory, the feeling, and the visual. And if you're guiding visualization or grounding people through their senses, you know, it's good to provide different entry points into those experiences, you know. Like myself, I might be more of an auditory and visual person, but if I only use those modes of perception when I'm guiding, which we're inclined to do when we're not using a script, you know, and we're kind of just going with the flow, we might be leaving other people kind of out of the experience who may be more kinesthetic. So that's a good one to remember, you know, cover all the senses if you can. Another one is being realistic about expectations. So, you know, rather than saying a practice is effective at something, you know, saying that it may be or it can be effective. And talking about what you're moving towards rather than what you're moving away from. So rather than dwelling on things like stress and tension and other things that you want to ease, bring in the language of what you're going towards. what you're trying to foster. Of course, now it's becoming more and more important, and that's a great thing that we're becoming more respectful of diversity in so many different ways, in gender, race, sexual orientation, neurodiversity, all sorts of ways. It's wonderful that we're opening up and being kinder in our language and more respectful. I've got some resources for this that I'll put into the chat for you around some of these issues. Okay. And the other one is to use active listening. So, these active listening skills, they're really easy to access through lots of different books and places on the internet. But I think active listening, when you're providing a space for group discussion, it gives you a really useful way to interact, which is really validating, really allows you to stay out of judgment. And it helps you stay centered rather than being drawn into what's going on for someone else at that moment. It kind of helps you really be in your heart and listen to what's going on for that person so that the person feels really heard. Okay. Okay. Just give me a moment. All right. So at the end of the day, we can do the best we can. We can try, and we're never going to be perfect. I guess in terms of having people in our meditation groups, not wanting to trigger them, wanting to say the right things and all that sort of thing, I think at the end of the day, it's normal for meditation practices to open people up to what they're holding in their system. And this is just part of the meditation process. It's a path and a journey that meditators go through. So at the end of the day, if someone is triggered or has a memory from the past arise, or they begin to cry, this is just is also a natural part of that process. You did not put that there. It was already there. So, you've got the skills with your meditation teacher training to support them in that moment and refer them if needed. But usually, debriefing and grounding in the moment's all that's needed. It's not about taking that on for yourself. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's about all I have to say about that. And I'm going to ask Ash to put us into some little breakout rooms. And I thought that we might have a bit of a discussion about, in your experience so far, what do you notice that when you're guiding groups or in the practices you've had so far, what do you find easy about what I've shared? What do you find you're already really confident with and comes quite naturally to you maybe? And maybe what do you find a little bit more challenging?
So I guess my plan in moving into the next session was to kind of move this discussion around the power of language and the power of words into a more broader space, maybe a little kind of outside the teaching and the meditation room, and more into a broader space. My background is that I come from being a corporate communications guy. I was in that corporate space for nearly 20 years. So for me, words and language and the nuances therein was kind of part of my life right from when I left university. So it's something that's pretty close to my heart. I'm very passionate about the spoken word and the written word, which is, I'm hoping, bled into my teaching. It's a bit of a continuation there in terms of communication skills. So I guess from that point of view, this makes the topic this afternoon something pretty pertinent to my life. And I wanted to start by dropping us into a bit of a story, if that's okay with you guys. An old Sufi teaching story. So I wanted to invite you guys just to either close your eyes or just sit back and let this one sink in. We'll see how it lands, and we can have a chat about that and move on to some other themes. And the story begins, we find a child who's very ill, and he's been seen by all the medics in the village, but nothing seems to be working for this young boy. And his parents are understandably quite distraught. And they decide to turn to a Sufi mystic who lives in the village. And so the day arrives where the mystic lands on their doorstep, and he's taken to the bedside of the child. And he bends down low and he speaks a few words over the child, whispering into his ear, taking his time with silences. And after a while, he lifts up his head and he turns to the parents and also a gathering of people that had come to see the mystic out of curiosity. And he says, "All will be well. This child will recover." And now then was a time, perhaps a little like now, when I guess people can be divided quite easily, and words spoken can often become the source of great conflict. And so there were some in that little gathering that were quite antagonistic to the idea of words being capable of healing. And one man, in a particularly loud voice, said to the gathered group, "How can words help here? This is a sham, and you are a shyster." And the mystic remained calm, allowed for the space. But he said to the man, "You understand nothing. What you consider thinking is just a rearranging of your prejudices. You are in danger of becoming a fool, simply enamored by your own voice." At hearing this, the man leapt up, furious, red with shame and humiliation. And the mystic looked at him and he said, "When a few words of mine can change your entire demeanor, make you heated, and drive you to your feet against your own will, why should words not also have the power to heal this boy?" So I hope you can feel into that, something of the power of words, and something that we as meditation teachers have full access to. It's a gift. You know, words have the power to build people up. They have the power to confine people to their homes. They have the power to break people down. And I feel like the current moment we find ourselves in is largely about the power of words. There seems to be a lot of people firing words out of a cannon from opposite sides. And so with that, I want to talk about my own teaching a little bit. And as many of you might know, I run an online community. Both there's a mixed group centered around meditation, but I also run a men's group. And in that men's group, of which there's about 250 to 300 guys, we have some very clear community guidelines, and a lot of them are around language and words. And one of the agreements that the men have to take is be impeccable with your word. And whilst that may seem, I guess, something hard to find yourself at the destination of. It's something we can always aim at, and each day in practice get better and better and closer to that, you know. Our words create, and they're a gift. And we actually touched on this in our little breakout group, which was wonderful. It's really interesting to me. Even a word like abracadabra, I'm not sure if anybody knows the meaning of abracadabra, but it's an Aramaic word, avracadabra, and it basically means, with my words, I create. And if you think about a magician, that's kind of what we are when we use our words and we use our language. You know, I'm also reminded of the Greek word abraxas. Some of you may have heard, which just means a mystical word. It has no other definition than that. And I think that's a beautiful way of looking at it too. Interestingly enough, in the Greek alphabetic numerology, the word's highly significant because it contains letters that add up to 365 a year. So you can see that words are magical. And when I'm using language, I like to think about the etymology of words, because I feel like certainly in contemporary times, a lot of words that we use in our language have actually changed in their definition. And it's my belief that a lot of them still hold the original energy of their original meaning. And when we just throw them out there willy-nilly and we don't understand their history, we're not honoring them with their correct energy. And I want to talk about a couple of words now by way of example, and there are very many. But one particular word which I hear about, which we hear a lot these days, is the word crisis. And crisis actually just means a change. It doesn't necessarily mean good or bad. So on a healing journey, a crisis could have a more negative outcome, but could also have a very positive one as well. It's just a turning point. And I'm not too sure it's used that way. Another word is busy, the word busy. And Lisa and I were talking about this before we jumped on this session. And you hear busy thrown about all the time. People actually use it as a badge of honor, don't they? You know, I'm so busy, and they kind of feel good about themselves in some sense. Well, the original definition of the word busy was anxious. So now when I hear someone say I'm really busy, it sounds to me like I'm really anxious. And it's worth thinking about when you consider where we are today. Busy, anxious. It's interesting. I must also let you guys know that on the way from moving to the way we know it now in the 60s for a while, and some of you who are a little older like myself might remember that the word busy meant promiscuous. So let's just leave that one out on the way through. So you can see how these definitions change over time, you know. The last one I'd like to leave you guys with is the word ambivalent, which in our language today seems to mean that we don't care. In actual fact, the word ambivalent talks to our ability to hold two truths at once. Ambi meaning both, and valent meaning kind of flexible. So I think having an ambivalent attitude to things may actually be the correct orientation in some senses. If you think about something like, I don't know, take any debate that's happening at the moment, masks or vaccines or something like that, in the true definition of the word, an ambivalent person would be able to see both sides of the argument and to be able to hold that middle ground. And to me, there's something in that about being a good teacher. Yeah. And looking at it through that lens, the opposite of ambivalent would be confusion. And the word confusion comes from confused, as in rigid and inflexible. So unable to see any side of the argument other than your own. It's interesting, isn't it? So this is just some of the power of words. Perhaps another one I could throw into the mix is the word awful, which Lisa and I were talking about. Awful seems to have become something terrible. And in actual fact, it means full of awe. It's the opposite of dreadful. So if things are awful, they're full of awe and curiosity and wonder. And so for me, this is the beauty of words and the nature of their very energy, you know. So I wanted to cover off a couple of different buckets of conversation, which perhaps we can move to in the breakout groups. But the other one is some beautiful work, and many of you have probably heard about this work on the call today, but the work of Judith Glaser, who talks about conversational intelligence. And we've all heard of IQ, and we're increasingly hearing of EQ. Well, Judith talks to CQ or CIQ, which is an individual's ability to communicate effectively. And our job as teachers in having a high CQ, I think, is paramount, you know. And I'd invite you to look up her work. She has a book of the same name, Conversational Intelligence, and it's well worth looking up. And perhaps we can post something in the notes, Lisa, because there's plenty of links and PDF workbooks and things like that she has. But she has like a 7-step process towards developing your CQ or your CIQ, which we can share. But many of them sort of tap into what Lisa was saying earlier, but I just wanted to point you in that direction. Yeah. And so just a couple of other things before we move on. And one of those ideas taps into the story that we heard at the beginning there, which really from a scientific point of view is talking about resonance theory. And some of you may have heard of Dr. Masaru Emoto, the Japanese doctor's research on water and resonance, and how when you speak to water negatively or positively, it kind of changes its structure. And I wanted to invite you guys into a practice which we can all do at home. And that is using resonance theory with an apple. And I'd invite you to take an apple and cut it in half and place one side of the apple on the kitchen bench and the other half on the other side of the kitchen bench. And when you're in your kitchen or near it, I invite you to speak negatively to one side of the apple and positively to the other. You're the apple of my eye or whatever it takes. And obviously not confusing the two, keeping the two separate. And what you will notice is that the side of the apple that you talk negatively to browns much, much more quickly than the other side. It's an interesting experiment that you can try and maybe take some photos at the end or something. It's a great one to do with kids too, because it shows them the power of their own words and their own language when they're speaking to one another or just in general. So it's a wonderful exercise that you can do. Yeah. And I guess the last thing I wanted to say before breaking out and having a discussion about all this is perhaps looking at it from a Buddhist point of view. And the Heart Sutra in Buddhism, which talks about emptiness has form and form has emptiness, the same can be said about our words, because without our experiences and and the meaning that we place in them, words are just words. You know, the power comes from the experience that we place in them. You know, if I think about a simple coffee cup, I mean, to me, it's just a container that contains a liquid. But, you know, if somebody had beat me up when I was 10 years old with a coffee cup, the word coffee cup would have an entirely different meaning for me. You know, I'd have some hesitation and there'd be some fear. So we need to think about that with our words too, that when we put them out there, people are going to will feel different energies depending on their life experiences, depending on their culture, depending on their role models when they're growing up, depending on all sorts of different things. So I guess that's worth considering as well. So finally, I wanted to leave you with a couple of quotes because I love quotes. And there were 3 that I kind of was drawn to when it comes to this discussion. And one of them's a Rumi quote. And I love Rumi, and it kind of taps back into our Sufi story at the beginning. But he said, "Raise your word, not your voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder." And I think that's beautiful. And the other two quotes are anonymous, but I just thought they were quite fun. And one was, the tongue has no bones, but it is strong enough to break a heart. And finally, be sure to taste your words before you spit them out. I just thought that was lovely. So that's really where I wanted to go, and just kind of broadening the conversation and giving us something to kind of chew on in the next breakout group. This idea of resonance theory, this idea of the magic of words. We said in our little discussion group that,
Okay. Thanks, everyone. And hope you had some good chats in your breakout groups. So I've placed some resources in the chat for inclusive language if you'd like to copy and take those away. Otherwise, I'll also give them to Karen to include in the video when that gets sent out to everyone. I thought now it might be nice to just share back into the main group, maybe some of the interesting insights or something that you've gained through the breakout groups, or maybe even any questions or comments that you'd like to add to the discussion. So I wonder if you'd like to place any questions or comments in the chat, and then I might call on you individually to share, and we'll unmute for that. So if you'd like to just take a moment to maybe just a few words in the chat would be enough, and then we'll call on you. So someone said you can't see the resources. I'll just place them in there again. I did it when we were in our breakout group, so it's possible that they didn't go to the whole group. Okay. There they are. And Ash has got some conversational intelligence tips. Fantastic. Okay. Well, rather than sit here in our beautiful silent space, Liv, you've got something here. You said your group spent a lot of time talking about the space beyond language. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, it was really funny because we acknowledged that we were in a language workshop, and we spent most of our time talking about resonance and just the capacity we have as teachers, and I guess the responsibility we have as teachers to manage our own internal space. And one of our group members works specifically with horses, and she was sharing amazing just examples of the way she actually did this workshop to learn more about language, because she spends a lot of her time in silence with horses, and it's about, feeling and sensing. And so we spent a lot of time talking about resonance theory and just, how important that is. Yes, language is part of it, but it's really I guess a human invention. If we kind of drop below the thoughts, the beliefs, the opinions, the history, the trauma, there's something that's much deeper in all of us, that truth, that authenticity, that congruence. They were a lot of the words that came up for us. And yeah, it was such a rich conversation. I just loved it. So yeah, thank you for enabling that, Ash and Lise. It was wonderful.
Sounds amazing, Liv. Yeah. And reminds me of how even through Zoom, now that a lot of us are running meditation groups over Zoom, just how the group energy of meditation can actually be felt even across the, through technology. I found that one of the biggest surprises when I started working on Zoom, that there was such an unspoken and intuitive and felt sense of togetherness in that space.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm sure Ash, given the time, could talk about heart math and all the research they've done around, with the resonance of the hearts and the magic that happens there.
Yeah, absolutely, Liv. I was just thinking as you were speaking to talk about, coherence, but I'd probably use too many words, but it's a beautiful thing. And I just wanted to acknowledge I don't know who the person in the group is that works with horses, but bless you, amazing. I think that's I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in that little breakout group.
Okay, we had Jenny who said, can you actually give language to the moment of awareness? Jenny, would you like to expand on that a bit?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Well, I was also sharing this with my group and talking about silence and what is like actuality. I've been reading this book, Inside Dialogue from Packman. And I love the way he explained that what is speaking the truth and what is actually what we're feeling in that kind of blocks of layers that we have in our minds when we're talking, like that inside talking. So today I was in the horse meeting, and I had these too many layers of talking about horses, and I'm grieving the loss of my horse, my special horse, and I just stopped being in the meeting, and it was chosen by me to say, I'm not gonna be sad or being in that narrative of what happened that was badly to my horse. I'm just gonna be talking about words today, and I chose that, and then I felt that kind of awareness like coming to me and but I felt my heart beating so fast that I was like, what is going on here? And they were talking, and I was just feeling really bad. And then I said, what is actually truth right now for me? What is it, the awareness that I'm going to give to myself to share with them, talking about when you're sharing in meditation. So can you really give actually language in that awareness space, openness that you choose to give to yourself? It's just, a question.
What a rich, deep experience for you to have had in that group. And what an incredible mirror, in that group with that lady who was sharing about horses and your own experience. That's incredible resonance, isn't it, in there? And often I agree, those very deep experiences often don't have words, or it can be very challenging to articulate them.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jenny. Okay. Okay. Hannah says, Robin and myself resonated a lot with diving into the etymology of words, chatted about words used in the medical world, drawn heavily from battle and war, and then impeccable. Sounds amazing, Hannah. Would you like to tell us more?
Sure thing. Thank you, Lisa. So both Robin and myself heavily rugged up like most people here from Melbourne. And talking about, I was reminded a little bit of Dr. Helena Popovich and her work around coming from the GP space and how we, have war on cancer and all of these very aggressive kind of words. And maybe if we can have a bit of a shift to healing and love and compassion in that area, then we'll be heading in the right direction per se. So we chatted a little bit about that, and we're looking up words on Google and all of the things, and looked up impeccable, Asha, which was a bit of a fine stemming, I think, from Latin and French and being faultless in our words. And then I think personally, there's the experience around being an athlete and the power of words that we're using in the gym or when you're on the bike or whatever sport it is. And you can tell yourself you feel strong or you feel weak, and you kind of create that as an outcome for yourself. It's crazy in terms of if you're just even lifting a weight and you're like, okay, I feel really weak right now, and the difference it has on that rep or that set. So it was a lot of fun and something that really resonated, and looking forward to doing a bit more research into that space.
Oh, I love that, Hannah. Thank you. That's brilliant. And there's an old I guess quote that I like, which is your words become your world. So this idea of telling yourself you're strong, you can do the next rep, and it just happens. I think that's just wonderful. And in the medical sense, even the word pharmacon for pharma and pharmacology means two things. It means poison and cure. It means both. So I think that's just really fascinating when we think about the use of language.
Okay.
I think Carol's got her hand up there. Oh, you might want to come off mute there, Carol.
I was thinking about the etymology of words and so on that you and the other participants have inspired, but I'm also thinking about the arbitrary nature of words and how language, especially written language and especially cyber language, don't have the same resonance or roots to language per se. I'm not sure if I'm expressing myself properly, but there is nothing intrinsically meaningful in a particular word. It's the meanings that culture and society have imparted to a particular word over time. And that because language, the words we use are arbitrary, we can attach so many meanings to them. I find it personally very satisfying to look at the historical meanings and roots of words, but given that the meaning can be changed so readily, makes me wonder about how we use it. Apart from using kind words and words of compassion, it makes me wonder about being able to realistically communicate in a way that's not rooted in the arbitrary nature of all communication and language. I guess I'm looking at semiotics and stuff like that, and you would have touched on that and known about it. So it's always been a challenge of mine to describe oral cultures with my literate brain. I have a great deal of difficulty doing that, and I know from having lived closely with people from an oral culture with no literacy, that words seem to have more power and threat, danger and comfort than they do for the bicameral mind of a reader. That's just something that is a challenge for me, that's all. And I'm wondering what your views on that are.
I love that you said that, and I think this talks to the idea about learning to be more and more precise with the language we use as teachers. I even think English as a language is a very blunt instrument compared to other languages. So we're kind of coming from behind the start line in the beginning, just by the simple fact that we speak English, which is not a very precise language.
Yeah.
So I think, I love everything you said there. Particularly, the way we're using text now, and we were kind of more and more losing that precision with the words. So I think claiming some of that back, reclaiming some of that as teachers is going to really help impart the wisdom and the practice of meditation. Absolutely.
Mm.
But yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's just, I love someone with a similar passion to mine.
I just have trouble stepping outside those thought patterns, that's all.
Yeah, one other thing I could say to that, I'll come to Kate, and there's a couple of hands up, but just the idea, even the story that I told earlier, Carol, and I'm sure, I hope you'd agree. Yeah, it's just what we're doing there is using metaphor rather than speaking to fact. Like I could say words have power, or I could tell you that story. And and you're going to be much more drawn to me telling you that story because I'm using metaphor. And we as human beings, we learn at a much deeper level through metaphor. So that's sometimes a really useful thing if you're guiding a visualization meditation or something like that, to steer away from the facts and try to use metaphor. I think it was Camus who said that using metaphor and telling stories like that, he says it's little lies to tell a deeper truth. Because that story that I told is likely untrue, but it revealed a deeper truth.
Yes, exactly. Oh, thank you for reminding me of that. That's wonderful. Thank you, Ash.
Kate.
Thank you. So I've been thinking about two Sanskrit words that feel like they're really kind of expand on these themes, and one being, we've talked about sort of the preciseness of language, and I think that's incredibly important, like as we're considering what we're doing in our role of teaching. And I also think about sankalpa, like our intention. So if our intention's really clear, and like what are we here for, and what's the purpose of this particular meditation or this particular segment of the course or whatever, I found a clearer I am, then language then serves that intention. So I feel like that's been beautiful practice. And there's also another word, matrika shakti, like the power of language. And I know some of my greatest teachers, when they've said a word like, say, love or compassion, or when I feel their word, like I feel the energy of the word. So it feels like a lot of like dropping into the power of language, and the energy of language is part of the deepening of the practice of teaching for me. So it's both being precise with language, but also if we think about resonance, it's being the state of what we're teaching in a way.
Totally.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Yeah. Dropping into your heart, even having some sort of practice that you do before you begin teaching, so that you can allow yourself to drop into that heart space more easily. And I think also what I said earlier about the inner work, the more our practice, the more practice we engage in, and the more we do our retreats, and we keep that forward moving momentum in our own life and in our own development, then that dropping into our heart and teaching from that perspective comes more and more naturally. It just becomes who we are, and then it's no effort at all. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kate. That was a beautiful sharing.
Yeah, I think that was wonderfully said, Kate. And to me, it's the intention behind the words that you use. That's what gives it that resonant push, isn't it? Like if I use the word love, but the intention is there behind it, that's what sends it out with that resonant energy for it to be felt. So it's super important. I think we've mentioned intention a little bit, but I don't think we can overemphasize that enough. So thank you for raising that, Kate. And well said. Beautiful.
Okay. I think, is there anyone else that would like to share before we finish up? Suzanne?
Yeah, I'll take my hand down. I realised like you can hardly see it. I don't know if I'm going to change the tone. Kate, thanks. Timely, just sinking into what I was trying to say as well, because I've been finding that it's what we read. And so I'm in the depths of reading, being Ram Dass at the moment, but I'm also reading about 3 other books at the same time, and they've all got similar messages but different words. And when guiding in meditation, what I've found is that it's the more I actually meditate myself and use those words, the clearer it becomes. And so then by applying those different meditative practices, so like when preparing the food, it's a mindful practice. There's actually mantra going into the food. And so, and then at home with the children, homeschooling, so it enables you just to be present but acknowledging, and I think it's where you were coming from, Asha, about we live in this sort of ampersand world where it's not or, it's and, there's this and this. So with those words, I find that that's why, as I said, I keep saying I love working with children, because I'll give those words to them and then I ask if they understand what they mean or what they mean to them. And then they come back and they give me another word. And it's like, oh, okay. So like you were saying, like awful. It's like and that's what I found with the language. So I found that my practice itself has changed, how I practice on like 3 or 4 times a day. But it's that balance of just being able to ask about what it is. I don't know if I've made my point clear, but it is about understanding that. And I've just found that by reading more, that it's sitting there, that we can sometimes overcomplicate it a bit.
Yes, no, I agree. Definitely, the simplification is definitely key here.
Yeah, because and it's just, and what Lisa said as well is that the more you practice, like I don't, this is my, it's only second time in sort of any form of connection within Meditation Australia, even though I've been a member for 3 or so, 4 years or whatever. So, and it's just interesting just to see about where we're evolving and where we're going. And the one thing that I've always maintained is it's that, we want to teach. So, and if you want to transform, and you transform yourself, and then working on the self is that constant journey. And as you transform yourself, then that comes through in your teachings, because usually that's what's going to transform the world, because we're all one. Yeah. So anyway, that's just my thought of taking all of this in, which has been awesome.
Well, maybe concluding on the fact that we're all one is maybe a nice place to finish.
Sounds perfect to me.
Yeah. Does everyone feel complete, or feel maybe they need to share a last word? I think we're all good. Well, maybe I'll just, quickly end by saying this is all practice, and using our words with precision and everything else we've spoken about here is a journey, and we're going to make mistakes often along the way. At the end of the day, we're really just making noises with our mouths, aren't we? And hoping to be understood. So, we're all in this together. And I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you for this is such a wonderful turnout, and it just shows me what a strong and beautiful community we've got here amongst our meditation teachers in Australia and New Zealand. So, from my heart to each of yours and each to the other, thank you so much. And maybe Lisa, if there's a final thought you'd like to share.
I just wanted to thank everyone so much for their honesty and their insights and participation. I've just found so much richness has come from what everyone shared, and so many other perspectives than what even Asha and I had started got the ball rolling with this. But really, it's nothing without all of your wonderful insights and perspectives. So thank you very much.
Mm. And I'm sure we won't mind, but can we just have a minute of silence together, just meditating together just for a minute to close this session off? That would be beautiful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Until next time. Take care.